hope you've been encouraged by what you've seen this morning. I know that I have. And I've been encouraged because we've already seen the entire gospel story today. We've talked through it in the first hour. We've talked through it, I'm sure, in our classes. And now we've sung through it and spoke about it at the table today. And we've seen the beauty of who Jesus is. And that's that question that Jacob left off his first sermon with, is who is Jesus to you? And that's exactly, we didn't talk about this ahead, but that is exactly where I wanted to start this lesson this morning, is the question, who is Jesus to you? And I want to emphasize that to you part. Because just like we talked about at the first hour, I don't mean the facts. I don't mean that he lived and died thousands of years ago. I don't mean that he had a miraculous birth. I mean, who is Jesus to you in your life right now? What effect does who Jesus is have on the way you live your daily life? The Gospels tell us a lot about Jesus, but they're not a fact book. They're not a list of, I used to have, I was a big Peyton Manning fan when I was younger. He went to the University of Tennessee. I grew up a Tennessee fan, so I loved Peyton Manning, quarterback for the Colts for a lot of years. And I had this book when I was growing up. It just said Manning on the front. And inside was more pages than I care to admit that was just fact after fact about Peyton Manning. And I would read that thing constantly because I loved Peyton Manning. That's not what the Gospels are. The Gospels aren't just a whole bunch of facts about who Jesus is. Sometimes I think we read it that way. We read just a whole bunch of stories that let us know just a little bit more about Jesus. The Gospels have a mission. And that mission is for you to take what you see about who Jesus is and you to do something with it in your life. We're going to be in Mark 4 and 5 this morning. And we're going to start in Mark chapter 4, verse 35. And what we're going to read through today are three stories that tell us a lot about Jesus. But these aren't stories without a point. These tell us who Jesus is in our life, the power he has, the authority he has, but just like we just talked about at the table, and I'm so glad that Kirk brought this out, that even though he has the power and he has the authority, he doesn't use it like any king we've ever seen before. Mark 4 and 5, this is very early in Jesus' ministry. Jesus has been teaching, he's done a few healings, and crowds have started to find out who he is. They've been talking about him, but nobody really knows much about him. The Pharisees are starting to think that he might be a heretic because he's declared himself above the Sabbath, like we sang about in the first song this morning. His family thinks that he's crazy. And nobody really knows what his purpose is. And so Mark gives us these three stories back to back to let us know exactly who Jesus is. Let's just start with the passage that we read at the beginning of service. Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he told them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the sea." So they left the crowd and took him along, since he was in the boat, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. And he was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. And they woke him up, and they said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" And he got up, and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Silence, be still." The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And then he said to them, and this is what I find incredible, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified and asked one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So this first story, we open up in a boat. And I don't know if you've ever been on a boat that's in a storm. It's not a good feeling. It doesn't even matter, now we've got these big fancy boats that have engines and stuff that help you get through the storms. But it doesn't matter. If you're out on the water and a storm comes in, you just can't help but feel a little sick to your stomach. It is not a good feeling to be surrounded out in the middle of nothing and see that storm cloud rolling in. And the disciples here, they don't have engines on the back of their boat. And they're looking at the storm, and then the storm comes, and the storm's beating down on the boat, and the storm's threatening to sink the entire boat, and they're freaking out, and I understand why. And I understand why they're annoyed with Jesus. He's sitting there at the bottom of the boat, asleep. And they're sitting there thinking, he doesn't even know that he's about to die. And he definitely doesn't seem to care. And so they get him up, and it seems to me that they didn't get him up very nicely. They said, "Hey, do you not care that we're going to die?" I understand why they're afraid. I understand why they're frustrated, because let me tell you, if I was sitting there in that boat, I would feel the same way. But of course, Jesus had complete peace. Jesus had peace when there was no reason in the world to have peace. It's a bad situation. The boat's going to sink, or worse, break apart, and Jesus had peace. But he had peace because he understood something that the disciples did not. Because Jesus already knew the authority that he had, and the disciples didn't get that yet. Jesus knew that when it was time, he could silence the storm. And so they wake Jesus up, they accuse him of not caring, and he doesn't even respond to them. Do you notice that? He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't get right back in their face. It's almost like he's acting like he didn't hear him at all. He just gets up, tells the wind and the sea to calm down, and it's over. And Jesus, even though I understand why the disciples were afraid, and I understand why they were frustrated, I even understand their accusation that Jesus didn't seem to care, Jesus does not seem to feel the same way. Jesus says, "After all you've seen." And remember, this is very early on into his ministry. They haven't seen a lot of the miracles that we would come to see. He says, "After all you've seen, why are you still afraid? Have you still no faith?" And that tells us something very important, something that I want to touch on in all three of these stories I think we're going to see. All three of these stories, Jesus dispels fear. All three of these stories we're going to read, Jesus does not want his people to be afraid, to live in fear of the world. And here, Jesus desperately wants his disciples to see that in faith, there's no need for fear. Because in faith, you can see that Jesus is in control. He really calls the disciples to open their eyes in faith, to abandon their fear and replace it with the same peace that he has. That they come to peace through faith, trust in his power over the world. The disciples aren't quite there yet. They got rid of their first fear. The boat's not going to break apart anymore, but they've just replaced it with a second fear. And their fear is, who is this man? Who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him? They understand that what they just saw Jesus do is unique. That nobody else has the power that Jesus just showed, the complete authority over all creation. They understand, I don't know who this Jesus is, but I know there's something different about him. That story is impressive, but I don't think it tells the full story of who Jesus is. I think we're going to come to see even more about Jesus in these next 20 verses. So if you want to start in the beginning of chapter 5 with me, we're going to read together. It says, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the region of the Gerasenes, and as soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs, and no one was able to restrain him anymore, not even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but had torn the chains apart and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day he was among the tombs and on the mountains. He was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him and cried with a loud voice, 'What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God, do not torment me.' For he had told him, 'Come out of this man, you unclean spirit.' So Jesus asked him, 'What is your name?' And the demons answered, 'My name is Legion, because we are many.' And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. So a large herd of pigs was there feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged him, 'Send us to the pigs so that we may enter them.' So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there. The men who tended the pigs ran off and reported in the town and in the countryside. And the people went to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus. And they saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting there, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it described it to them, what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs, and then they began to beg him to leave their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged him earnestly that he might remain with him. Jesus didn't let him, but told him, 'Go home to your own people. Report to them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has shown mercy on you.' So he went out and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus has done for him, and all were amazed." So if the last story we read didn't give you enough of an impression of who Jesus is, the way Mark tells this, it seems to be this happens directly after. They get the boat on the shore, and boom, we're into the next story. And it's really easy to get lost in this story. This is a weird situation. I know preachers probably aren't supposed to say that passages are weird. This is a weird story. There's demons, there's chains, there's tombs, there's pigs. There's a lot. But don't get so lost in all the strange details of the story that you miss the point. Because the point is, Jesus landed there, and there was a man possessed by demons. A lot of them. Strong, powerful demons that no man could tame, and they had tried a lot. Demons, spiritual servants of Satan, evil forces, they had ruined this man's entire life. And there was nothing in this world that they could do about it. And the moment Jesus landed, he lands on the shore, the man is there, and those demons are on their knees. These demons that no one could tame, though they had tried. These demons that nobody could do anything about, they're on their knees, and they are saying to Jesus, "You are the Son of the Most High God." The demons knew. That's really, actually, if you want to think about it, the answer to the disciples' question just a few seconds ago. They asked, "Who is this man that has authority even over the wind and the waves?" And the demons answer it. He is Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. And then Jesus immediately proved that statement to be true. Because it doesn't matter how strong the demons are, and they were. And it doesn't matter how many there were, and it seems like there were a lot of them. At Jesus' simple command, they left. All of this chaos that these demons had wrought, all of the destruction they had caused, with a simple command, they're gone. And now there is a healed, changed man standing before the people. Jesus immediately proved he was the Son of the Most High God by doing what no man could do, showing complete authority over the spiritual world. Proof that Jesus is God. Jesus didn't have to do any fancy shows. There weren't any rituals that he had to do. He said it, and it happened. He proved his divinity. But again, what do you do with that? The crowds, they didn't like it. They had seen the power of Jesus, and they had seen the result of his authority, and they wanted nothing to do with it. Because they didn't understand it. They had never seen anything like it. It's scary to see that kind of power, that kind of complete control. They didn't trust it. The crowds chose fear. But again, Jesus doesn't want his people to be afraid. That wasn't the point. The point is to release us from fear. And no one understood that better than the man who had the demons inside of him. Because that man had lived for a long time being hopeless, being afraid, being a scourge upon the people around him. Can you imagine how miserable of a life that must have been? I mean, everyone around you being so afraid of you and what's inside you that they try to chain you into a graveyard just to keep you away from everybody else. That's the life this man lived. And he felt the full healing power of Jesus. And he wasn't afraid. And he didn't ask Jesus to go away. Instead, the man who truly saw the changing, healing nature of Jesus wanted to draw near to him. He wanted to join him. And I think what Jesus says to him is really telling. He says, "Go tell everyone else the mercy that you've received." Jesus says, you've been given the gift of mercy. You've received that gift of mercy with faith. And now go tell everybody else about the mercy I've given you. And he did. So Mark has told us that Jesus is Lord of all creation, that he's the Son of God with all spiritual authority. And we've seen that he uses that authority to replace our fear with mercy and faith. But I think this last story maybe gives us the full picture. If you want to pick up in Mark chapter 5, I'm just going to start reading in verse 21. When Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the sea. And one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and he begged him earnestly, "My little daughter is dying. Come and lay your hands on her so that she can be well and live." So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd was following and pressing against him. Now a woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years had endured much under many doctors. She had spent everything she had and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became even worse. Having heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothing, for she said to herself, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be made well." And instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. And immediately Jesus realized that power had gone from him, and he turned around in the crowd and he said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he was looking around to see who had done this. And the woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told the whole truth. And Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be healed from your affliction." And while he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue leader's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, only believe." He did not let anyone accompany him except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. And they came to the leader's house, and he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And he went in and said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him. But he put all of them outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with them, and he entered the place where the child was. And then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. And at this they were utterly astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. Again, the way Mark tells this story, it seems like it's just the moment that Jesus lands back on the shore, he gets another mission. This man, Jairus, his daughter is super sick. And he humbly asks Jesus to heal her in his power. Jairus may have not known a lot about Jesus, but he knew enough to know that Jesus had the power to heal the sick. After all that we've seen, we know he's the Lord of all creation. This is no issue for him at all. But before Jesus could even get to that, something else happens. The crowds are pressing in, and Jesus feels that he healed someone. And yet again, it's a woman who couldn't be healed by any doctor. They had tried for a long time, but the doctors couldn't do anything. In fact, all they did was make her worse. And notice the faith that she had. If I even touch the hem of his garment, I will be made well. She didn't know that. You ever think about that? We know the end of the story, so we know how that it works out for her. She didn't know that was going to be true. That had never happened before. Jesus had never healed anyone by them just touching his garment. This is completely new territory. But she had such faith in who Jesus was that she said, if I can just get close to him and just barely touch his clothing, I'm going to be healed. That's the sort of faith she had in the authority of Jesus, in his power to heal, and it was true. And again, Jesus looks out into the crowd and he says, Who was that? And she came to him again humbly in fear before him. But again, he immediately takes her fear away. He says, "Go in peace. Your faith has made you well." Notice what Jesus is saying here. Because you believed in who I was, your pain is gone, your sickness is gone, your fear is gone. And we've replaced it with faith and peace. Again, it just shows us Jesus is a healer and he is Lord of all things. And yet the finale to the story, I think, is really the proof of all that. Jesus and Jairus, they hear the news, the girl's dead. Pretend you don't know the end of the story again. This is heartbreaking news. This is the end of the road. There is despair, fear, depression, but I think Jesus' next words are very telling in verse 36. Again, do not fear, only believe. But Jesus, how can I cast off fear here? How can I find belief when all I see is death and despair? The story is over. I understand why the crowds don't want him to be troubled by this. They think there's nothing that can be done. Sure, Jesus has healed people. Sure, Jesus has shown himself to be more capable than any doctor, but you know what no doctor does? No doctor takes a dead person and brings them back. That doesn't happen. So they don't think Jesus can really do anything now. Sure, I'm sure Jesus had the power to do something when she was alive. She's not. The story's over. Let him go and do whatever the Messiah does. But Jesus insists on visiting the girl. And again, it's just Jesus' simple words that bring her back. Jesus doesn't sort of do the healing that maybe you see on TV sometimes. There's not a lot of yelling or shouting or like bonking somebody on the head. That's not the way Jesus did it. Jesus had the authority to take her by the hand and tell a dead girl, get up. And she does. That's the power that only God can have. And so Jesus can say, don't fear, only believe. Because he, unlike the crowds, he already saw the end of the story. He knew that he was going to bring her back from the dead. And now, Jesus, through Mark's gospel, he reaches out to you. And he says, why are you afraid? After everything you've seen, have you no faith? Do not fear. Only believe in Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, who has all authority over creation, over the spiritual world, over even death itself. And he can he can get rid of all of the fears in our life so that through faith we can live in peace. That's really what Mark wants us to see in chapters 4 and 5. Let's take just a few minutes to apply that to our lives. And the first thing that I really need us to see here is that Jesus has all authority, and we need to bow before him. The Jesus we saw in these stories, he is perfectly in control all the time. There is never a spot in this story where Jesus doesn't know what to do. There is never a spot in this story where Jesus doesn't know what to say. There is never a spot in this story that Jesus doesn't know how the story is going to end. Because Jesus is the Lord over all things. He has authority over everything earthly and spiritual. He has control over life and death itself. We've been asking the question from the beginning, who is Jesus? And Mark 4 and 5 tells us unequivocally, Jesus is the Lord, the Son of God. Even if all you had of the gospel was Mark 4 and 5, Jesus tells you you have enough to believe in him. You have enough to believe in who he is. But I want to go back to that question we were really trying to answer at the beginning of this lesson. Who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus in your life? The crowds, and even the disciples at this point, they don't get it. They're afraid of the power of Jesus. They don't trust him. And so the crowds want nothing to do with it. They want him as far away from him as possible. They've seen the power of Jesus and they reject it. But here's what Jesus offers. He wants to replace that fear with peace, mercy, and healing. He offers us the same thing that he offered the woman that touched his garment. He offers us the same thing that he offered the man who was healed of the legion of demons. He's offering to change your life. He's offering to change the life of everyone who has a humble faith in who he is. And that's an important part of the story, and I think that's what Kirk hit so well on the table today. God has all authority, and he could demand whatever he wants. Jesus is Lord. He could desire submission at all costs. He could desire fear. That's not what he wants. He's not a king like we've ever seen before. What Jesus wants is love. Jesus had every right to seek what was best for him, but instead he did the opposite. He sought what was best for us at great cost to himself. Make no mistake, Jesus is Lord, Jesus has all authority, but Jesus never abused that authority. He used it for the good of us. He uses that authority to have a relationship with you, to seek something better for you. And so we must bow in submission to a God who could choose to be a ruthless dictator, but chooses to be a friend. A Lord that could demand everything, but chose to give everything. Bow in submission to Jesus, who though he has the authority over life and death, heaven and earth, he's the good shepherd who wants to take away your fear and replace it with mercy and peace and healing. Give your life to him, and he'll repay that faith by showing you a better path for your life. Because as we saw in Mark 4 and 5, Jesus wants what's best for us. And so whatever we have to cast aside, let's do it. However big it is, to truly seek his way. Give yourself to the Lord. Humbly bow before him. And just like he did with the woman at the well, he did it with the woman at the well too, but just like he did it with the woman with the bleeding problem, just like he did with the man who he cast out the legion of demons, just like he did with Jairus, bow before him and he is going to raise you up. You know, I think a lot of people are looking for a purpose. This world is big. This world is intimidating, and I am small. And I feel insignificant. I'm searching for something to connect me, to make me feel a part of something bigger. I want to feel a part of something that's better than myself. So maybe it's my career. It's the company. Maybe it's the school I went to or the community I came from. Maybe it's a sports team. Maybe it's a club or an activity. Maybe it's the nation I live in. Maybe it's a political movement. I just want something bigger and more important than myself to connect me to. I'm looking for a community to give me purpose and to give me meaning. Mark 4 and 5 tells us we have an opportunity to find our purpose with God. That all glory is in him, all authority is in him, and Jesus offers to freely connect us to a life so much better than our own. What could be more important and meaningful than that? We have to reorient ourselves. And we have to do it today. Because if I find my meaning in something in this world, if I find my purpose in this life, I am going to live a life that's always going to be disappointed. Because Jesus is where true life is. Jesus is where glory is. Jesus is where all joy and purpose is. And we have an opportunity to find life in him. We have an opportunity to accept his free gifts of peace and mercy and healing. And we can start right now by committing ourselves to something greater, a mission of service to the Lord. Our mission to love God and to love others. Our mission to shine the love of Jesus into this world. And it's going to be hard sometimes. And there's going to be some days you wake up and you don't want to do it. But it's worth it. Because Jesus offers eternal peace to all who humbly submit to faith in him. He will heal you. He will lift you up. He will change you. Mark 4 and 5, Jesus offers, why are you so afraid? Have you no faith? Do not fear, only believe in Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. And that's the invitation. Come to the Lord Jesus. Bow in submission so that He will lift you up. He will replace your fear with love. He will take your brokenness and make you whole. He will give you life and purpose. And He will give you peace here in this life, but even more so eternally. We serve a Lord who has authority over life and death, heaven and earth, and He wants you to be a part of His kingdom of peace. So whatever we have to do, we got to lay it aside. We always offer this invitation for those who aren't currently a part of Jesus' kingdom, to lay aside your sin, lay aside the cares of the world, and join Him, join the Lord. And we do want to offer that. We can offer a life that's so much better than anything you're going to find in this world. You can join that through repentance and baptism and coming to our Lord Jesus in an humble faith. But I also want to remind those of us who have already made that commitment, Jesus offers a better life. And it's really easy to get distracted in this world. I know it because I've done it. It's really easy to lose your purpose. I know it because I've done it. Let's refocus ourselves. I want you to take some time today to honestly think about your life and your path. Where are your priorities? What do you truly care about? What are you seeking in this world? And if what you're seeking is of the world, you're going to be disappointed. But if what you're seeking is truly Jesus, you're going to find peace and life. However we can help with that, feel free to come to the front as we stand and as we sing.